Okay, so now I'm going to talk about what I call the different kinds of supported typing. The first one, the three ones I'm going to talk about are facilitated communication, the rapid prompting method, and spelling to communicate. Now, and that's in order of appearance. In the early 80s, there's a woman named Rosemary Crossley who's pretty much devoted her life to this. And in science, they talk about building on the backs of giants. And so it's the idea that, you know, she started this and has continued with it, but other people are taking over. But she really, is a giant in this area. So she started. She was working. Rosemary Crossley is a speech therapist who lives in Australia in the Melbourne area, and she had a young child. Well, I don't know actually if she was that young. I think she was more like a young adult. But she noticed that Annie would look at different things and just seemed more intelligent than she was able to get out. Annie had cerebral palsy. I don't believe she had the diagnosis of autism. But so Rosemary essentially brought out a letter board and did different things with her and taught her to communicate. And one of the things was to kind of support her hand, but not, not guide her. And so in the late 80s, I guess probably, I think it was around 89 or 90, Doug Bicklin went over and met with Rosemary. He'd heard about her success. She had typed with Annie, but then she started using it with other clients, including clients with autism. And so he was really, who were diagnosed with intellectual impairment. And Doug Bicklin went over and learned about it and brought it back to the United States. Now, this is a lot of where the controversy comes. So they started using it, but hadn't really flushed out exactly how they should be teaching people, and probably weren't aware at that point that there is such a potential to influence someone, probably with other diagnoses, but autism in particular. There's a real reliance on external cues, and so they're very easily influenced. We did a kind of a short mini study at camp one time to look at. We had this motion detector, and so you could measure the EMG, the muscle activity of the person that was supporting and the person that was typing. And we went through a series of influence. We had an influence trial. We did it with the therapists, with typical bodies. And we saw that the kids definitely, looked at the letter in influence trial. So influence trial is, so like say the support person was told to type THERE, and the typer was instructed to type THEIR. And so what we saw with it was only 5 campers, but what we saw was so the THE was very fluent, and then when it went to switch to the different letter, the camper would look at their letter, but then go over, be very easily influenced. And we also had, some independent typing of a word unknown to the facilitator. But due to lack of money, we couldn't really proceed. The thing with, I'm going to do a video on science and talk about it more, but I actually was on a grant that we submitted to look at that probably like 10 years before we did the study at camp, or the short little pilot study at camp. And what we saw was that erase that. So I had applied for a grant, and we got, it got sent back. They said no. And one of the respondents was saying, the people who evaluated it said, well, I thought facilitated communication was over and done with. That this is just a bunch of crap. And so the problem is, if people think it's all is said and done, then nobody's going to be able to get a grant to get money to do the research. But then there's critiques about that they say that it's all been said and done, and there's critiques of people who use it that's saying that it's not evidence-based, which is, I'm sure is a big, buzzword in therapy and medicine. So that's facilitated communication. So facilitated communication, there's like 3 prongs of it, and we'll go into this if you decide to get on the website and and purchase the videos. I'll get into this a little deeper. But you've got the resistance, you can have touch, you can use like rhythm, and they all work together to help access the motor system. So the second technique that I'm going to discuss is something called the rapid prompting method. And this was a mom of a young boy who was non-speaking, kind of discovered on her own, similar to me with a touch and tell with Chris, that what did she do? I think she taped a pencil or a pen to her son Tito's hand and taught him how to write, because when he was typing, people weren't believing it, and so he and there's some books that Tito's written in poetry. So that's the rapid prompting method. Essentially, the rapid prompting method, if you look up Soma and Tito, if you Google it, you'll come across some videos. And Soma's just a force of nature. She's like, we're going to do this right now. Okay, let's get going. Next letter, keep going. So that's why the rapid prompting method. But it's also, all of these methods rely on some sort of external cue to get the communication out. The last one, so Soma was the inventor of rapid prompting method, and then the last, typing to communicate is, or spelling to communicate is, was created by Elizabeth Vossler, and I think they're on the East Coast, I forget. But it's another, if you Google spelling to communicate, I think it's Growing Kids Therapy, that they developed, and the training with facilitated communication now is a lot more in depth in terms of technique. And spelling to communicate is a little more, gives you steps and levels to go up. So you start on a very small board, and then when the person gets independent with their movement, then you move to a board that's, has more letters, and then you'd eventually move to a keyboard. So the idea, the main purpose of, or the main point, I guess, with spelling to communicate is that you are really working on that independence of movement. So either it could be like getting a pencil and going towards letters, or it could be, just if they can get their finger out, then they can use their finger. But some kids, can't. And it goes to the dyspraxia, and we can get into all the brain connections. But it does make sense. So I talk about the key ingredients, and I look at like what's going on. And rehab scientists talk about key ingredients. And I think there's essentially key ingredients are that kids can pick up with autism, can pick up on the written word, and probably even better than you or I because of their visual spatial sense. So I wanted to put this slide in so you'd have a good visual of what I think of as the key ingredients of supported typing. Rehabilitation scientists talk about the key ingredients of any particular technique. And so the touch of resistance is the first one I think of, which is mostly in terms of the facilitated communication. but I do see some touch being used in the other techniques as well, which is, of course, never influencing in any way, or you need to really guard against that. Using rhythm, which or I think of mostly in terms of the rapid prompting method. Keep going, keep going, keep going. You got it. That's it. But I've also seen music therapists use metronome to try and get a good rhythm down. Of course, all of them use the written word in a variety of ways, and we'll talk about that on the website in terms of there's a ton of different ways you can use the written word for supports. Using objects, which I think of as mostly with the spelling to communicate. The emotional support and cognitive support are in all of the different techniques. I would say more in the facilitated communication and spelling to communicate. So those are the three types of typing and or supported typing, and in the next video I'll go over some books and videos and that you can watch that'll kind of give you a stronger sense for how to do this.